program by, for, and about women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Our topic tonight is the two-earner family. With me is Dr. Carolyn Shaw-Bell. Dr. Bell is an economist and holds the Coman Chair in Economics at Wellesley College. She is chairwoman of the Federal Advisory Council on Unemployment Insurance. She serves as consultant to Congressional Committees and business firms. Dr. Bell has written extensively in scholarly journals as well as the popular press. Also with me is Susan Edmiston. Susan is a freelance writer. She is author of Literary New York, A History and Guide, published in the spring of 1976. She writes frequently on issues of feminist concerns. Susan's article, Love, Honor, and Earn, The Two-Income Marriage, appeared in the first issue of a new magazine called The Working Woman. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Carolyn, when we were talking earlier in my office, one of the things you said you wanted to do was clear up some popular misconceptions about the two-earner family.
Well, I think the largest misconception is of the sheer number of such families. Over half of the couples in this country consist of working wife and working husband, and by this I mean working outside the home for pay. Wives and husbands also both work at home, but we've gotten used to this inaccurate cliche of working wife and working husband meaning employment. If you look at the two-earner families by ages, the proportions are even more significant. 3 out of 4 couples under the age of 35 are both employed outside the home. The figure is about 66% for the next age group from 35 to 45. Among the older couples, there are fewer, of course, where the two-earner family is common. But the fact remains that the typical American family, consisting of the husband and father who supports the wife at home and the children, went out of existence 15, 20 years ago, and nobody realized that such a family has disappeared.
Has this been happening fast? I mean, is there a sudden infusion of women into the workforce? We all discussed earlier a recent New York Times article which said the market is flooded with women, the job market is flooded with women, and it is a tremendous event of tremendous importance. I mean, would you agree with that?
I think that the entry of women into the labor force has been for almost 30 years an event of tremendous importance. It's certainly not particularly recent. It's interesting if you look at the 3 different waves that have taken place. About the mid-50s, the number of married women who were older, between the ages of 40, 55, whose children were grown, became new members of the labor force looking for jobs after their children were, if you like, out of the house. Beginning in the early 60s, there was a substantial increase in the number of women employed outside the home who had children at home, under 18. And since 1970, the most rapid growth among married women looking for work has been the mothers of very young children with children under 6 or under 3. So that to call this recent or rapid is just ignoring what's been going on for a long time.
Susan, do you think women are joining the workforce for different reasons today than they did, say, 30 years ago?
Well, first, to say something more about Carolyn's point, I think that what is true is that finally we've seen the effect of this growth over the past 30 years of women in the labor force. So now it looks as if all of a sudden it happened because finally we've gotten to these really quite spectacular numbers of wives working at paid jobs. I think that the economist theory, nobody is really sure why this has taken place. There are several theories. I mean, one theory is that it was really caused by demand in the labor force, that there was a demand for clerical workers and ever-increasing demand, and women filled these jobs. And then there are the other factors, like women have been getting more and more education. So now, first of all, they're motivated to do something with that education, and perhaps they're prepared to do more things. And then for the first time we have an ideology, I guess, that helps them perhaps overcome the feelings of guilt they might have about wanting to work or liking to work, so so that they feel freer to take paid jobs. And then of course there's this theory that it has something to do with inflation, that their money is really necessary at various levels, and Carolyn could probably speak better.
What
to
about that?
Well, I would say that women have always worked for the same reasons that men do, namely to earn an income. I think we have to remember that the significant change that we've been talking about that took place since the 50s really consists mostly of white women, white married women, that there has not been any significant rise in the percentage of black women in the labor force, because such women have always worked outside the home in far greater numbers than have white women. White women are catching up. The fact that women do work to earn income shows up very clearly in the difference in the incomes of families where there are two earners as opposed to those dependent on the husband and father. If you think again about the young families that I mentioned first, where almost 75% of them consist of two earner marriages, their median income, 50% below and 50% above, was something like $17,000 last year, as opposed to $12,000 for the family supported, quote, close quote, by the husband and father alone.
What is our attitude toward the roles that men and women should play? What sort of effect has this had on our attitude of the two-earner family?
Well, I think that there hasn't been enough effect yet. I mean, that's part of the problem, that because we haven't realized that the typical woman now does work outside of the home, and we still have this hazy idea of Dick, Jane, and Spot, and Mommy and Daddy or something. We haven't really adapted, and I think that what's happened is that women have tried to do everything. They've tried to fill all the old roles, all the traditional roles, as well as taking on the new job. And I think that this is, really everybody has to think about this and think about what changes are needed.
Let me talk about attitude from a slightly different approach, because I am an economist, so I really don't know anything at all about what people think or want, except from the data that other people give me. But I am very sure about why this notion of the traditional family persists, and that's because the so-called typical four-person family is used over and over again as the quote, reference family. We just had a very complex tax reform bill go through Congress, and all of the newspaper accounts that I saw, whether this was in the Wall Street Journal or whether it was in the daily suburban newspaper, presented the results, how the typical four-person family would be affected. We've had presentations of the effect of inflation, and it's always the level of income that it takes to support a four-person family. We hear talk about the minimum wage or about the amount of poverty income, and it's always the four-person family. And yet such families comprise a minority of all of them. In fact, if you figure out the total number of families in the country, which is about 55 million, there are about 6 million which consist of a man who supports a wife at home and 2 children. Yet most of our information comes in terms of this typical four-person family. That, I think, is why our attitudes have not changed.
You don't agree?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a kind of romantic illusion that's still abroad, because the typical family does still have 2 children, doesn't it? I mean,
Sure, but it's reinforced by all these presentations.
Well, do you think that's going to change, Carolyn? Do you think they're going to start saying something else?
I don't know. Heaven knows I have been fussing about it for a long time. I was delighted to read an analysis by the Committee for Economic Development that used the 3-person family on the grounds that that is the most common type of family with children, and it is. There are more of those families than there are with 2 children. The commonest type of family is the childless couple. I think the difficulty comes that once you abandon any one kind of family, then you have to talk about 6 or 7 kinds of family, and it becomes complex. And usually, alas, people prefer simplistic answers.
Let's talk a little bit about the problems, some of the problems that the excuse me, 2-earner family have. One is there's kind of a parenting problem, isn't there? Referring to what Susan said earlier, sometimes women feel they have to be super women, they have to do it all, and there isn't always a shared experience. And do you see that as changing at all?
I do. I mean, I think that younger families particularly are changing a great deal, much greater involvement of fathers with their children now, and I think that we'll see more and more of that, and that will become more and more the norm. And this is why the change is so significant. I mean, that it will affect the relationships between men and women, the roles that each plays in the family, and their relationships with their children. People talk about psychological changes. Children in families where the mother works outside the home tend to see the fathers as more expressive and nurturant, and that's probably for very sound reason, that those fathers have had to be more involved with those children. So that changes the fathers, and it changes the children, changes everybody.
It certainly also has an important impact on our conception of the economic meaning of work. I started out by saying that work goes on inside the home, and clearly when you have 2 people working and earning income outside the home, then there's more of a tendency to share the work inside the home as well, although there may be a great deal of conflict about how these household duties do get shared. There's a lot of home production that has gone on for years that economists have not measured because there's no way to measure it. But there is not only the household production of caring for children and the adults too, but the volunteer work that has never been paid, and to the extent that women have new demands on their time outside the home, then I think there's being a reallocation of their time inside the home and those of their marriage partners as well.
Yeah, one of the most striking things that happens is that all of a sudden the amount of housework shrinks radically. You know, it goes from, there have been some studies done. There's one by a woman named Joanne Vanek at Queen's College. The average woman who stays at home does 55 hours per week housework. The minute that woman goes into the workforce, she's only doing 29 hours. Now, what happens there? You know, what has happened?
Do we know?
Is the house still running?
The roof is falling in, I suspect.
I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of things happen. One thing that happens immediately is that people become more efficient. You know, I've had endless numbers of women tell me, well, I used to run to the store every time I needed something, and now I just do one shopping a week. Often shopping is something that husbands will take over. The studies don't show that husbands are really doing very much housework yet. So that those 26 hours difference or whatever go somewhere else. But husbands the husbands will do the shopping, or the husbands will take on a lot of chauffeuring of kids, that sort of thing. I think there's much greater efficiency. I also feel that, although I think Carolyn disagrees with that housework was really glamorized during the 50s, and people felt that they had to be gourmet cooks and throw parties all the time and that sort of thing. And that now with the new realities, they're giving a lot of that up. You know, people will cut back. They don't cut back on what's really important to them, But for instance, one woman told me she stopped fulfilling obligations that she didn't want to fulfill anyway, like entertaining relatives.
She only did it when she enjoyed it herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, your first point about women not employed outside the home working so many hours is just an example of Parkinson's law, that work expands to fill the workers available to do it. But I think there's another thing too about the two-earner family, and I have to keep coming back to the fact that this makes a change in the total income, and that is that the two-earner family does have the opportunity to buy labor-saving types of consumption, which the non-employed wife does not. There isn't much difference between two-earner families and one-earner families as far as durable goods are concerned, because, well, for one thing, you don't go out and buy a washing machine every day anyway. And at the middle income level, which is where most working wives are concentrated, both inside and outside the home, washing machines are a fact of life. What you do find is a higher percentage of consumption on processed foods, on frozen foods, on the drip dry sheets, drip dry clothing, all of these soft goods which aren't durables in the marketing sense, and yet which do account for a higher proportion of income where there are two earners. And this clearly saves the time on household chores. We don't know enough yet about the difference in consumption expenditures because all the economists are sitting around with bated breath.
I was just going to say, do we know how they spend the money?
We're waiting for the data from the 73-74 study to be published, which we're promised will be sometime next year.
Well, there are some things, though. Didn't you say that there isn't as much saving going on?
Yes, the figures that I just quoted about durables and non-durables come from an excellent paper done by Myra Strober at Stanford and given at last week's American Economic Association meeting. One of the more interesting of her findings, which she is looking forward to replicating given some new data, is that there is a significant difference in the amount of saving done by families at the same income level. If there are two earners, then the family saves less than if there is only one earner. And the answer, of course, is the common sense notion that many husbands save so as to protect their wives and children in the event of their death. They save through insurance, they save through contributions to pensions, they save through savings accounts per se. But if a woman is employed and can support herself and her children, then there is no need for that kind of saving or for that amount of saving.
I do think that there's also a difference in the psychology. Many women told me that for the first time they began to feel, for instance, that they could spend money on themselves or their own education, things that previously they wouldn't have felt they had a right to. And of course, another thing is that the new money, the fact of its being there becomes a reason for all kinds of expenditures. Like my sister just went to work and called me up to discuss whether she should go to Mexico or England, whether they should take the entire family to Mexico or England. And I said, well, that sounds like a very expensive vacation. She said, well, we're both working now. Now, I'm not sure that same family with the money coming only from the husband would have been thinking in those terms. I don't know. I mean, they're just...
It sounds like maybe not.
There's some kind of psychology that's operating.
Yeah. Being a member of a two-earner family, I think there's a kind of security. Maybe it's a false sense, but you feel like doing things like that.
But there is a very real security. You are not going to be helpless in the absence of
You mean even
of
if
your
you
husband.
blow all your money on your Mexican vacation?
Well, of course, you're going to be able to continue to earn money to support yourself when you come back from Mexico.
Maybe it's so new, Carolyn, we're all not sure of that yet.
Maybe that, or maybe economists have been more concerned with why people save anyway. There's one other point, though, that we should remember, and that is that it takes a certain part of the income you earn to pay for having a job. There are work-related expenses, and that's another reason why saving is less where there are two earners in a family.
One of the things I hear all the time is that women are taking jobs away from men. How do you feel about that?
It's a lot of nonsense. Shall I tell you why
Yes.
in 6 words or 6 hours? The most important thing to remember is that occupational segregation is still the norm in this country. We have a measure. Occupational segregation means that there are some jobs that are men's jobs. 90% of the people in such an occupation, bricklayer, for instance, actually the figure there is 99%, are men. We have other jobs that are women's jobs. Nurses, 95% of the nurses are women. So we can describe men's jobs and women's jobs in those ways. Most women work in women's jobs, and it follows that most men work in men's jobs. You can put all of this together in a very simple measure, which, if all of the jobs were distributed equally among both sexes, this measure would be 0. And if all of the jobs were just for men or just for women, that there was total segregation, the measure would be 1. Well, the measure is actually 0.6, and it has changed from 0.61 in the last 15 years. That's not much change. Consequently, women are not taking jobs away from men because women are taking women's jobs. The other reason that such a thing could not happen is that we are in a growing, expanding economy. Once we come out of this recession and there are even more jobs created, then they will be open to both sexes. It may be that the opportunities for young white males will be less 10 years from now than they were for their fathers, because these opportunities will be open to black men and black women and white women. But that's not to say that the women are taking jobs away from men.
Is there a way to measure the impact of the two-earner family on the economy? I mean, what would have happened if this trend hadn't appeared?
I shudder to think. Another thing that I don't believe many people are aware of is that over the past 30 years, while more and more women have been looking for jobs and finding jobs, the number of men, the percentage of men in the labor force has been decreasing. There is a smaller proportion of men who are now working in any age group than there was 20 years ago. This has occurred mostly at both ends of the age spectrum, that is, men over 55 and men below 25. But if the men have gone out of the labor force and the women had not replaced them, then obviously our total production would have fallen. As it is, our total production has expanded by 300% in the last 30 years, and some significant portion of that represents the work of women.
Do you think this is a trend that's going to continue and continue in an upward? The two-earner family, you think the percentages are going to get higher and higher and higher?
Well, I can think about it at least in one way. I'm sure you could think about it in many different ways. I think that people's standard of living continues to rise also, and another economist, Isabel Sawhill, said that it's pretty hard to keep up with the Joneses these days, but almost impossible if both of them are working. Well, both work, the standard of living rises, other people in the same peer group see this, they want to get in on it too, and it's sort of a spiral. So I think it'll continue, and I think, of course, there will be, as more and more women do this, there will be less and less censure applied to it. So I see it really continuing.
The latest figure is that 43% of all of the women over 16 are now in the labor force, and the Labor Department projects that that'll be up to something like 56% by 1985. The Labor Department has been wrong for years in making its estimates too low. Obviously, there's a limit to the percentage of women who are in the labor force. At the moment, 76% of the men are in the labor force. So you might think that the upper limit for women was 76%, or maybe for both sexes it's something like 2/3. I smiled when you asked the question, not because I don't think the number of women is going to increase, but because I'm not sure about the survival of the family. And you did ask about the two-earner family.
Why aren't you sure of the survival of the family?
Well, because I think there are other models that are being tried, or that it is becoming far more frequent for individuals to move in and out of various family relationships. The 15 years ago, if you knocked on a door in this country, the chances that you'd find a family behind that door were 3 out of 4. Today, the chances are only 2 out of 3. There are fewer people living in families right now. So this is a trend that we have to think about,
the
too.
two-earner family is being blamed for the destruction of the nuclear family at times. I mean, it's a kind of coming and going sort of thing. What were you going to say, Susan?
Well, I think everything is changing, so we don't know where we will end up. I think clearly women's lives are different and will be different, and women will think about their lives differently. I think everyone really now will think in terms of working for a long period of time and how she's going to work that out, you know, how she's going to plan having children and combine that with working. And people didn't do that before. I mean, even in the past 10 years, women didn't do that. They just sort of went along and then found themselves at one stage or another. I think there is a lot of stress on marriages right now because we're in the midst of this great change, and everybody has different ideas. And very often, a woman herself will have conflicts. But
we're out of time. I'm very sorry. I thank you both very much for being here. Thank you for watching, and good night.
This program was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding was provided by public television stations. Additional support was provided by unrestricted general program grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.